Chinese Communist Party has declared an all-out war on their political enemies, and now they're bringing the battle to America. Welcome to China Uncensored, I'm Chris Chappell. It's happening. The Chinese Communist Party has launched a final, last-ditch effort to eradicate the biggest threat to their rule. Slow, gentle exercises, meditation, and the dangerous principles of truth, compassion, and tolerance. Yes, Falun Gong. According to leaked documents from China's Ministry of Public Security and other party entities, the CCP has launched a plan to fully eliminate Falun Gong worldwide. That's right, not just in China. A big part of the plan is targeted at the United States and manipulating the US government and media. And I want you to pay attention to the tactics they're using, because these are the same kinds of tactics that communist regimes often use to go after their enemies, whether we're talking about the Soviet Union, Mao's China, or even Marxist activists in the United States itself. But first, what is Falun Gong? I have longer videos about it, but in short, it was a Chinese spiritual movement that gained tremendous popularity in China in the 90s, to the extent that by the Chinese government's own estimates, there were more people practicing Falun Gong than there were members of the Chinese Communist Party. And so the CCP launched a massive and brutal persecution. Falun Gong practitioners were arrested, tortured, raped, and became the backbone of China's involuntary organ donation system. Yes, the Chinese Communist Party is literally killing them for their organs. But instead of being wiped out, Falun Gong resisted. They went from being a non-political spiritual practice to protesting the CCP's persecution to eventually calling for an end to the CCP itself. Today, after 25 years of persecution in China, Falun Gong has become one of the largest grassroots movements protesting the CCP around the world, especially in the United States. In particular, Falun Gong practitioners set up media outlets like the Epoch Times to report on the CCP's persecution. They also created Shenyun Performing Arts, a Chinese music and dance show that tours internationally. Shenyun describes itself as China before communism, which the CCP hates. And they also directly show the CCP's persecution of Falun Gong using dance, which the CCP really hates. This was not the quick, quiet genocide the CCP wanted. Over the years, Falun Gong won accolades from human rights organizations and governments around the world for their peaceful, nonviolent protests. The US government has directly sanctioned Chinese officials involved in persecuting Falun Gong. And a few months ago, the US House of Representatives unanimously passed the Falun Gong Protection Act that would specifically sanction Chinese officials involved in organ harvesting. Yes, it even brought Democrats and Republicans together. And that's why the CCP is trying to blow it up. According to these leaked Ministry of Public Security documents, China will mobilize concealed agents to create and escalate the internal conflicts of Falun Gong, to expand non-stop the fighting, strength, depth, and reach of social media influencers targeting Falun Gong and Shenyun, and they must attract the continuous attention of the entire United States society and force the US government to strike on all fronts, eliminating the force of Falun Gong. That's right, the CCP is trying to mobilize you in their war against Falun Gong. So there are several tactics being used in this plan. Let me break it down for you. 1. Activate embedded spies. The CCP has embedded its own agents within the Falun Gong movement in America. This is really typical of CCP tactics. Just recently, a Chinese-American man was convicted of spying on dissidents for China. His name was Xunjun Wang, and he was so successful because he posed as a pro-democracy activist. This does several things. First, it gives the CCP information they can use to disrupt protests. It also erodes trust within the dissident group because you don't know who might secretly be a Chinese spy. Plus, it's a great way for these Chinese agents to smear whatever group they're infiltrating. According to the Falun Dafa Information Center, these kinds of CCP agents have impersonated their staff, sending fraudulent emails to elected officials, journalists, and NGOs around the world. The emails were crafted to portray Falun Gong as bizarre, threatening, intolerant, and otherwise undeserving of sympathy or respect. And just last month, there was a major uptick in fake accounts on X that impersonate senior Shenyun staff and make seemingly damaging or outrageous statements. Eventually, the accounts were removed by the social media company after complaints were filed, but a lot of the damage had been done. And these secret agents also tie into another tactic the CCP is using. 2. Weaponizing the US media. The CCP has always used propaganda in its state-run media to brainwash people, drowning out dissenting opinions and drilling in the party line. But what's scary is how successful China is at manipulating US media, including social media, to do the same. China is using a vast network of influencers on YouTube, Facebook, and of course TikTok to spread propaganda. China has funded pro-Beijing influencers travel. They pay the creators and have generated lucrative traffic for the influencers by sharing videos with millions of followers on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. In return, these influencers push Beijing's propaganda. There's no genocide in Xinjiang. COVID came from the US. Tibet is the happiest place on earth. Last year, when Meta disrupted a massive disinformation campaign linked to Chinese law enforcement, they found the network was or is present on nearly every popular social media platform, including Medium, Reddit, Tumblr, YouTube, and X. That's incredible. The CCP is still using Tumblr. But the larger point is, the CCP is now aiming their massive propaganda apparatus at Falun Gong in a big, coordinated way. The leaked documents reveal the Ministry of Public Security is supporting 2 Chinese-language YouTubers, one with long-standing past ties to Chinese state media, and another who has threatened violence against Shenyun's training center in New York. I won't provide details about who they are because I don't want to give them oxygen, and because the real fault lies with the CCP, not individual YouTubers. But part of the plan involves using the CCP's embedded secret agents to provide these YouTubers with information. The content is clearly designed to portray Falun Gong as bizarre, threatening, intolerant, and otherwise undeserving of sympathy or respect. Like interviews with former Shenyun dancers that claim they were discouraged from seeking medical treatment because they should be healed by faith. Except there are well-documented cases of Shenyun dancers getting normal medical treatment and surgeries for things like torn ACLs and ruptured Achilles tendons. In one truly bizarre case, one of these former dancers claims a kid died after fainting at Shenyun's training center, while the attending adults merely prayed for a recovery. When someone dies, there's a police report and a coroner's report, which show the time and cause of death. These reports show that the kid fell ill at home and was taken to Westchester Medical Center, and an expert from Columbia University's Medical Center was consulted in the case. Again, the point is to get people to hate Falun Gong. Now, if this propaganda was limited to just 2 Chinese-language YouTubers, it might not be very effective. But according to the leaked documents, these YouTubers and the network of embedded spies are meant to share defamatory information about Falun Gong with foreign media, and to manipulate search engine results related to Falun Gong. And one of these YouTubers explicitly mentioned the New York Times. Now, the New York Times has a very interesting relationship to Falun Gong. In 2001, the Times got a rare interview with then Chinese leader Jiang Zemin, the guy who launched the persecution of Falun Gong. It was a very flattering interview. Days later, the New York Times website was unblocked in China. Coincidentally, after the Jiang interview, you can see a steep decline in the New York Times coverage of Falun Gong, even as more and more of the Falun Gong were killed under the CCP's persecution. The Times also started using the Chinese regime's description of Falun Gong, evil cult. According to former New York Times reporter Didi Kirsten Tatlow, she pitched to her editors a series on China's forced organ harvesting of Falun Gong practitioners, but it was rejected by her editors. According to Tatlow, it was clear to me the issue was unwelcome. Interesting. The New York Times is a big deal. It's probably the most influential newspaper in the country. It has tremendous influence on US public opinion and even government policy. If you're the Chinese Communist Party and you want to turn the American people and government against Falun Gong, this is your best vector of attack. And just last week, the New York Times ran not one, but 3 hit pieces targeting Falun Gong and Shen Yun. Interestingly, one of the reporters working on that recently had a 6-month stint working for the Times inside mainland China. The articles repeat many of the easily disprovable claims made by those Chinese YouTubers I mentioned earlier, that Shen Yun dancers are denied medical treatment and face abuse. It also basically denies that organ harvesting is happening, despite a mountain of evidence showing otherwise. Ultimately, some readers might walk away from these articles believing Falun Gong is bizarre, threatening, intolerant, and otherwise undeserving of sympathy or respect. Which brings me to the CCP's final tactic and goal. 3. Turn U.S. sentiment against Falun Gong. Jiang Zemin vowed to eradicate Falun Gong in 3 months. 25 years later, Falun Gong has become an international movement and a major thorn in the CCP's side. In order to fully eliminate Falun Gong worldwide, like the leaked Ministry of Public Security documents say, the CCP has to eliminate support for Falun Gong. All of the previous tactics are leading up to this. There are 2 steps to this. A, provoke the U.S. government to investigate Shen Yun and other organizations founded by Falun Gong practitioners. And then B, incite Falun Gong practitioners to distrust and even protest the U.S. government. There's already been some ham-fisted attempts at the first, like Chinese agents trying to bribe the IRS into removing Shen Yun's non-profit status. That didn't go so well because bribes are illegal and they got caught. But the YouTube influencers and media attacks might be more effective. If they can convince U.S. authorities that Shen Yun is abusing minors, that could trigger an investigation. Already, the U.S. Justice Department has launched an investigation into the CFO of Epoch Times, accusing him of money laundering. All of this feeds into the second step. As you might imagine, Falun Gong practitioners who escape persecution from the Chinese government might be a little cagey about the U.S. government investigating them. The Ministry of Public Security plans to activate these spies to stir things up, to protest the U.S. government publicly, and to provoke incidents during such public protests, and thereby force the U.S. government to suppress Falun Gong. Such a classic communist tactic. They're trying to manipulate the U.S. government and public to do their bidding, in this case, to end Falun Gong. The CCP is betting they can get Americans to turn on Falun Gong by making them seem weird, like they're religious nut jobs. But you know what? It doesn't matter what kind of strange beliefs people have. I believe pepperoni and pineapple are the best toppings for a pizza. What you believe doesn't matter, it's what you do. And for 25 years, despite horrendous abuse, torture, and slander from even Western media, Falun Gong has never used violence against the CCP or anyone else. They've used peaceful protests and dance to expose the crimes of the CCP. And this is what the CCP doesn't get about America. We were founded by religious nut jobs. We fought for the right of the people to believe whatever crazy things they want, to say whatever insane things come to mind, and to have guns. This is America, the land of the free. And the CCP just doesn't understand freedom. Now, unfortunately, unlike the army of influencers the CCP is funding, I don't have any financial backing for China Uncensored, except the pittance of YouTube ad revenue when they don't demonetize the show, and support from viewers like you. So please, join me in exposing the Chinese Communist Party by supporting the show on patreon.com/China Uncensored. All it takes is as little as $1 an episode. You can even set a monthly limit, so you could even support the show with just $1 single a month. And as a thank you, I'll answer your questions at the end of these episodes. And today's comes from Mervin. Are all Chinese-made products and products with Chinese roots considered spies? We must be wary and protect our data regardless of origin. It's unclear if authorities from other countries have thoroughly vetted potential spyware in Chinese products. I hope there is a real alternative to Chinese-made products. That's a really great question. So I've made extensive videos about all the problems with things like TikTok and Temu. But big picture, any company in China with more than 50 employees has to have a Communist Party cell inside of it. This is how the CCP essentially erases any meaningful distinction between private and state companies inside China. And that means if the party wants to use a company as a weapon, legally that company has no choice. A few years back, Bloomberg ran this story: how China used a tiny chip to infiltrate US companies. The chips allowed the attackers to create a stealth doorway into any network that included the altered machines. It reached almost 30 US companies, including Amazon and Apple, by compromising America's technology supply chain. Basically, things made in China got a spy chip implanted inside of them. But it's also apps and games like Genshin Impact. Basically, anything the CCP touches is tainted. That's why I'm very concerned about the hit new game made in China, Black Myth Wukong. I just made a video about that on my other channel, Gamers Unbeaten. Click here to check it out. So yes, Mervyn, I'd be careful. Thanks for your question and your support. Thank you for watching. Click the orange button to join me on Patreon. And once again, I'm Chris Chappell. I'll see you next time.